All right, I will say good morning. Good morning, good morning. Beginning of a beautiful new week together. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this year. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Adar Aleph, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all of his Sherman Droshos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah and Dinah Bas Dov. To thank Art and Sherry Miller for dedicating all the Sherman Droshos this month in memory of Art's brother, Richard Miller, Reuven Ben Betzalel V'Rachel. And to thank our Week of Learning sponsors. I think it's the first time we have Paul and Kathy Pollack. Baruch Hashem for the Pollacks. Paul and Kathy Pollack in memory of Paul's grandfather, Zechariah Ben Zechariah, whose yahrzeit falls on the 9th of Adar. We also thank our Daf Yomi sponsor, Malkie Rosenbloom, in honor of Josh's birthday. Mazel tov, mazel tov, mazel tov. Hameh ve'esim shanim tovos. Beautiful. All right, so with that, let us begin. We are up to our final week in Meseches Moed Katan. So we'll say really incredible sugyas. We are up to, today's daf is Chafei. Thank you to Reb Karman Akiba for giving the beautiful shir yesterday. We are up to the Mishnah on Chav Daled Amud Beis. So we'll say, so the Mishnah continues with some of the other fascinating halachos. Some of the other fascinating halachos concerning Avelos. And also, I think as you've begun to see, I mentioned this in shul yesterday a little bit as well. Sometimes it's amazing to see how through the halachos of Avelos, one in fact learns how to live a proper life. Right? So in other words, we see these halachas, and the truth is, one of the interesting dynamics of Hilchos Avelos in general, I've had this conversation with Avela many times, which is people, Rahman al experience a loss, then they're cast into this new world of Avelos, and by the way, as you've begun to see, there's a lot of halachas of Avelos, and yet, again, no one ever learns Hilchos Avelos, right? But unless you're like studying in the sugi in yeshiva, most times we don't learn Hilchos Avelos before it's applicable. So I've often had this conversation with Havelim about wouldn't it be helpful to learn these halachas before one is in this particular situation. Therefore, one could be prepared since the reality is that loss is an inevitable part of life. Okay, so I think for a variety of reasons we don't spend too much time during Hilchos Avelos before we have to. But again, one of the beauties of going through the daf is that we're able to see these halachas in a panoramic view. But again, my goal through these halachas is I hope you're beginning to see that so much of it teaches us not just how to live in the midst of death, but also focuses us how to live a more meaningful and maximized life. Through so many of these messages that Chazal are giving us, Hilchos Avelos, they're life-affirming messages. We're going to see a number of those today. Says the Mishnah, Ein korin, v'lo choltzin ve'in mavrin, ela krov of shomeis. Shabbos say an interesting halacha. The only people who are obligated in kriya, and the only people who are obligated in choltzin, remember choltzin is the bearing of the shoulder, mavrin refers to the Sudas Havra'ah, which is the meal of consolation, the first meal after the funeral. Again, we still have that today. That is a meal that is provided for by the community. The only people who engage in all of these practices are Krovov Shalmes, our relatives. Our relatives. In other words, if you're not an immediate relative of the deceased, an immediate meaning, again, 7 relatives, son, daughter, brother, sister, spouse, mother, father, those are the 7 relatives. If you're not one of those people, then you don't participate in these halachas avelos. Now, I will say, I'll just mention something interesting. Technically speaking, one could sit shiva for whoever they want. We'll say, I'll tell you this, this comes up? This comes up in the realm of adopted parents. Right? Let's say a child is adopted and a parent passes away. Is there an obligation of an adopted child to go ahead and sit shiva for parents? So it's a whole discussion in the poskim. Interestingly enough, to a certain degree, it's a little bit academic for the one simple reason. You could sit shiva if you want to sit shiva for whoever you want to. In other words, the process of sitting shiva, so certainly is an adopted child permitted to sit shiva for their parents? Of course. Are they obligated to? So that's a discussion halacha. But if the child wants to, it's not a question. Now, where it gets into a little bit more complicated situations are situations like aninos, right? Where, again, a person is exempt from mitzvahs. So that status really is only conferred upon, again, not our topic for today. But I'll tell you where this does come up in an interesting fashion. What about kriya? Sebosai, can I say you hear about the death of someone who you care deeply about, but they're not your relative? Can you tear kriya? Can you tear kriya? We are going to get to the daf today, by the way. Right? Can you tear kriya? So I will say it's an interesting discussion because we've seen examples of obligation to tear kriya for non-relatives. Right? Where do we see examples of it? We just saw it. We can see it again today. A Rebbe, a Talmud Chacham, an Av Beis Din, a Nasi. Now the truth is that's not really a good raya because there the halacha mandates that you mourn for these individuals. Let's say stam, I hear about someone who I care about deeply. So we'll say, kriya is an interesting thing. Why? Because kriya requires, by definition, destructive action. You have to take something, you have to destroy it. In halacha, we also have the concept of bal tashchis, right? Of not engaging in wanton destruction. So there is just an interesting idea about tearing kriya in a non-mandated fashion. Is one permitted to do it? Or halacha l'maisa, does it represent some degree of bal tashchis, unnecessary destruction? Okay, a discussion. Any event, the point that the Mishnah is making over here is that the mourning practices that we've been focusing on up until this time are only for immediate relatives. Vein mavrin, ela amita zekufa. And you can only eat the sudas havra on an upright bed. Now remember, part of Avelos, as they observed it, was kfiyas hamita, overturning of the bed. And clearly you see that when the Avelim would eat their meal, their sudas havra, they would eat it on this overturned bed. Or in other words, they would eat their meal sitting on the ground, sitting on a low chair. Other people often ate with the Avelim. I will say, think about this. We don't think about, whenever you have somebody sitting Shiva, right? Who else is in the house? Who else is in the house? Family. So family is often sitting with the Avelim. But what's important to note, says the Mishnah, is that when the family eats together with the Avelim for the Sudas Havra, the family cannot sit on an overturned bed. The family, the Mishnah says, the family sits on an upright bed, which means the family sits on a regular chair. On a regular chair, in a regular space. Beautiful. I will say that's the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, top of Chaf Hamad Aleph, Vafilu Chacham. Now I will say the Mishnah makes it sound like the only people for whom you ever tear kriya, go ahead and bare your shoulder and eat your sudas havra is for an immediate relative, but for no other person. Gemara says, is that true? What about Talmud Chacham? We learned about again, Vatanya, Chacham shemeis hakol krovav. If a Chacham dies, everyone is his relative. Hakol krovav, really everybody is relatives. Everybody is his relative. Ela hakol kik krovav. Both say when a great Talmud Chacham dies, everyone is treated like his relative. Meaning what? Hakol korin alav, v'hakol choltzin alav, v'hakol mivarin alav. Ultimately, again, everyone does kriya for him. Everyone bears their shoulder. Everyone eats a sudas havra b'rechav in the city. So both say, so there are examples of non-relatives for whom one is obligated to engage in mourning practices, yet the Mishnah doesn't discuss it. Lo tzricha delav chacham. No, Mishnah is not discussing a chacham. Inachinami. I will say, it is true, for a Talmud Chacham you have to engage in certain mourning practices. The Mishnah is not talking about a Talmud Chacham. Good. The Gemara says, V'i Adam Kashahu. What about if a person is an Adam Kasher? Right? What's the halach with the Adam? We'll say now, what does the Adam Kasher literally mean? Like it says, a Kasher person. We'll define in just a moment. Chiyuvi mechayve lemikre. We'll say, for an Adam Kasher, if one hears about the death of an Adam Kasher, an upstanding individual, one is obligated to tear kriya. Rabbi say, listen to this Gemara. This Sanya, mipnei ma banov ubenosov shel adam mesim kishem kitanim. Rabbi say, this is a wild Gemara. So the Gemara says as follows: why do a person's sons and daughters die when they are young? Chas v'shalom, kedei sheyifke v'yisabel al adam kasher. In order that a person should come to cry and to mourn for an upright individual. The Gemara says, what does that mean? Yifke v'yisabel. Arvuna kashakil mine. Are you taking a guarantee from a person that is shemorn? Ella mipnei shelo bacha v'his abal al adam kasher. They both say this Gemara is incredibly troubling and problematic. The Gemara says, why does a person chas v'shalom lose his children when they're young? Because he did not properly mourn for an adam kasher. When an adam kasher passed away, he did not properly mourn. The Gemara says, shekala bocha umis abal al adam kasher. For when you mourn for an Adam Kasher, an upright individual, all of your sins are forgiven. Because of the kavod you've given to the Adam Kasher. To which Shabbos says, so the point the Gemara is making, we'll come back to just a moment. The point the Gemara is making over here is that you see there are people other than relatives for whom one is obligated to mourn. The lav adam kasher, the Mishnah is not talking about an adam kasher. Now, both say a Gemara like this demands explanation. So, first of all, a number of questions. What is an adam kasher? That's number one. Number two, what does it mean that if a person fails to mourn for an adam kasher who passes away, he ends up chas v'shalom burying his children? What does that mean? How do you understand something like this? So, I want to share with you something amazing. First of all, the definition of an adam kasher. The definition of an adam kasher can be found in Hilchos Avelos, in Yared Deah, Simin Shin Mem Sif Vav. Shin Mem Vav. Rabbi say, listen to this halacha. Al adam kasher. What's the definition of an adam kasher? Well, say, here we go. She'eno chashud al shum aveira. She'eno chashud al shum aveira means what? He's not suspected of any aveira. Now, both say, now I want to be clear. Does it say he doesn't commit any aveira? No. In other words, everyone commits averas. Look to your right, look to your left, right? Look at yourself. Everywhere, right? We all commit averas. Eno chashud al shum avera means he's not known. He's not suspected for the commission of any particular sin, which means what? Good reputation. First step in an adam kasher is he has a good reputation. When people look at him, they say, good guy. Good guy. Does he commit averas? Does he commit averas? Everybody commits averas, right? But again, there's nothing, in other words, there's no sinful behavior that anyone talks about. Listen to this. He's also the kind of person, I will say, who what? When faced with an opportunity for spiritual growth, takes it. He's the kind of guy who everyone knows, whenever he has an opportunity for a mitzvah, right? We'll say, you know, there are two kinds of people in life. There are people, when you need them for something, miraculously, they're always what? They're always busy. It's fantastic. It's incredible, right? No matter weekend, weekday, morning, even I have to get back to you. I've got stuff going on. Baruch Hashem, a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff going on. We'll say, and then an adam kasher is someone faced with an opportunity to help, faced with an opportunity to do something meaningful, grabs it. So we'll say, these are the criteria of an adam kasher. A guy whose reputation is such is that he's a good guy. It's not known that he participates in any averos. Number two, takes advantage of his spiritual opportunities. Never mevatel a mitzvah. V'lo sani shumani. And in general, there's nothing bad that people say about him. Right? There's no bad rumors circulating about him. Afal pi, what says as Shulchan Aruch? Afal pi she'eno gadol batorah. Even though maybe he's not the greatest Talmud Chacham. Right? He's not an accomplished scholar. Afal pi. So listen to this. Isn't this incredible? The criteria for an adam kasher. Criteria for an adam kasher. The kind of person who no one speaks about averas that he's done, because I'm sure he does averas, but he maintains a good reputation. Person who's known that when presented with opportunities for spiritual growth and opportunities to help others, he takes them. A person whose general reputation is in high standing in the community, even though he is not a Torah scholar. Rabbi said this is an adam kasher. So the Gemara says when it comes to an adam kasher, you're chayiv to go ahead and mourn for such an individual. You're chayiv to mourn for him. And Rabbi said, what does the Gemara say? If you don't mourn for him, what's the lashon of the Gemara? If you don't mourn for him, then the halacha is, the lashon of the Gemara is, I'm sorry, but mipnei ma banav ubnosav shel adam meisim shein kitanim. But the thing what the Gemara is saying is like this. We'll say, who do you mourn for? Who do you mourn for in life? Think about this for just a moment. Who do you, right? We hear about instances of death all the time. Right? Who do you mourn for in life? Who do you mourn for? You mourn for people who matter to you. You mourn for people who matter to you. See, I will say, one of the most incredible things that we do for our children in chinuch is who are the people that we put on a pedestal. Right? Who are the people that we look up to? Who are our role models? And when our children see our role models, what we create for them is a system of values. And this is incredibly important because parents very often, have their own role models, but I have to understand that my role model, I might like this person or idealize this person, that person. But when my kid sees that, what they're really getting is not just the person who I put on a pedestal, But what that person represents suddenly creates a system of values for my child as well. So at the end of the day, the Gemara says, who do you put up on your pedestal? See, if you put up on your pedestal an Adam Kasher, which means that when an Adam Kasher passes away, I mourn for that. Because most, you know what the world needs? Let's be honest. Does the world need more Talmidei Chachamim? Let's be honest. Everybody always feels compelled to say yes to that, right? There are so many Talmidei Chachamim. I don't think the world... it's always good to have more Talmidei Chachamim. That's not actually what the world needs. What the world needs is more Anoshim Ksherim. The world doesn't need more Gedolei Hadar. We have plenty of Gedolei Hadar. The world actually doesn't need more spectacularly brilliant scholars. There are plenty of them, Baruch Hashem. What we don't have enough of are Anoshim Ksherim. Good people. Just good, and there are plenty of them, Baruch Hashem. But how much better the world would be if there were Anoshim Ksherim. People who took advantage of spiritual opportunities. People who maintain good reputation. People who are just good people through and through. Not perfect, not great Talmidei Chachamim, just good people. So the Gemara says, when I mourn for an Adam Kasher, my child sees that and they say, now I see what my father's value system is. I got it. I see what he values. I see what's important to him. Spiritual growth. Trying to go ahead and be a person who gets along with other people. Trying to be the kind of person who's able to resist temptation to sin, even though I'm not always successful. These are the things that are important. So why does Chazal say? Why do Chazal say that halacha l'maisa, if you don't mourn for an Adam Kasher? Again, what's the lashon? The lashon is mipnei ma banav ubnosav shel Adam meisim kisheim kitanim. Meisim sheken kitanim can mean in two different ways. Could be misa. There's the type of death that's a physical death, and there's another type of death which is a spiritual death. You know when spiritual death occurs? When you stunt your growth. When you stunt your spiritual growth, that's death also. Perhaps what the Gemara is saying is like this. Do you want to know the way that we stunt our children's spiritual growth? Meisim kishein kitanim. We stop their growth when they're young, is we don't give them the right role models. When I don't give my child the right role models, then meisim kishen kitanim. Biologically, they're alive, they're growing, they're great, they're fantastic. But I've stunted their spiritual growth. I've stopped them from actualizing. I've stopped them from maturing because I haven't given them the right role models. If I don't mourn for the Adam Kasher, then my children don't see what I really believe in. And when my children don't see what I really believe in, and I don't convey to them, ultimately, again, the right system of values, then at the end of the day, I stunt them in their youth. Meisim Kishahim Kitanim. Such an incredible yisod that Chazal are trying to convey to us about who we look up to, and who we look up to by definition is going to be, at least initially, who our children look up to as well. And it's one of the most incredible and profound ways in which we convey a system of values to our children. If we convey the system, right system, then ultimately they grow and they fly. If we go and convey the wrong system, wrong role models, then chas v'shalom, we stunt their spiritual growth when they are young. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says as follows. Another interesting halacha. So the Gemara says, "Idu kai hasam mishas yitzias neshama chiyuv v'mechayev." We both say an interesting halacha. If you are with a person when they pass away, you are obligated to tear kriya. They will say, we'll discuss about what we do with this contemporarily. But if you are there, b'shas yitzias neshama, at the time that a person passes away, then halacha lamaisa, one tears kriya. Desayir b'shem ben Elazar omer, ha'omir alameis b'shas yitzias neshama, chayiv likroa. If one goes ahead and is with a mace at the time that the person passes away, they're chayiv to do kriya. So the Gemara says, listen to how beautiful this is. Lemaza doma, they both say, what is death compared to? L'sefer Torah shenisraf. Both say when you see a person pass away, it's like a Sefer Torah that's been burned. Shechayiv l'kroa. And when you hear about a Sefer Torah that's been burned, you're obligated to go out and tear kriya. Sefer both say this is the halacha of tearing b'shas yitzias neshama. Now there's a lot of interesting halachic literature about this, because the truth is contemporarily, we don't really do this. We do kriya at a levaya, at a funeral. So there's two reasons given for this. Number one, Rabbi says, is actually incredible. The Rishonim bring down, actually we're going to see this in the Gemara, that there was a concern that if you make people tear b'shas yitzias neshama, now both sides, let me be clear, the obligation that the Gemara is espousing over here to tear when a person passes away is anyone who is present. It's not just a relative. Right? So you're there, attending to someone and they leave this world, you're obligated to tear kriya, whether you're related or not. So interestingly enough, the Rishonim bring down that Chazal were kind of suspended this practice because they were afraid that people would dafka not want to be there at the time that a person passed away. Right? And it is so important for a person not to be alone when the neshama leaves the body. It is so important for a person to be surrounded by others during their final moments. So Chazal said, better to suspend the halacha of kriya. Because a person, I'm wearing my good suit that day. Right? I'm wearing a nice shirt. I don't want to tear kriya. So a person might actively absent themselves from the last few moments in order to save their garment. So Chazal said, well, relax that halacha, better to be there. Gesher Chaim says there's another reason. The Gesher Chaim says because often people are not proficient in kriya. How to do kriya, right? Which side? Remember, we saw both sides. Sometimes you do kriya on the left, sometimes you do kriya on the right, sometimes you do all the layers, sometimes you do one of the layers. So the Gesher Chaim brings down that therefore the practice has become that we do it at the Levaya, because at the Levaya the Chevra Kadisha is there. Okay, now it's the Rav is there, but the Chevra Kadisha is there, and the Chevra Kadisha does kriya with the person that the kriya should be done correctly. But again, I both say, technically speaking, this is the halacha on the books, that if you're there, b'shas yitzias neshama, one does kriya. But I'll just tell you, so much to do on these dapin, it's ridiculous. I'll just say something so beautiful. Rabbi Soloveitchik has a beautiful insight over here. He says, listen to this insight, and then we're gonna go forward. The Rav says like this. I'm gonna read to you. It's a quote. He says, "Hare kedusha sefer Torah nova'as mikach sha'sofer kasel l'shem kedusha sefer Torah." So remember, if you're writing a Sefer Torah, Hashem, 2 weeks from today, our groundbreaking, we're also going to begin a Ksiva Sefer Torah. So amazingly enough, how does a Sefer Torah become kosher? So the way it works is that you need a sofer, right? You need a scribe to be able to do it. And the scribe, of course, the sofer has to write it, L'shem Kidushas Sefer Torah. And the Rav writes, V'yefshar l'kadish Sefer Torah, b'li shieh l'sofer Kidusha. Now, here's the Shaila. So the sofer has to write L'shem Kedusha Sefer Torah in order to infuse the writing with Kedusha. Where does the sofer get his Kedusha from? Right? Where does the Kedusha of the scribe come from? Umikanu masik shalakol Yehudi yesh Kedusha Sefer Torah. This is how beautiful this is. A Yid, a Jew, has Kedusha Sefer Torah. Each of us has the Kedusha of a Sefer Torah. That's why a sofer is able to go ahead and write a Sefer Torah. Because what is the Sofer doing? What is the Sofer doing? He's taking his Kedusha Sefer Torah and he's transferring it onto the klaf. That's literally, I have a Kedusha of a Sefer Torah. I'm taking it and I'm putting it onto the klaf itself. Therefore, we'll say able to go ahead. Isn't this beautiful? So a sofer is able to take his Kedusha Sefer Torah, or you're writing a letter in a Sefer Torah. How does that work? You take your inherent Kedusha Sefer Torah and you transfer it onto the klaf. For both sides, based on this, the Kotzker, and then we're really moving on. The Kotzker said, sometimes you hear somebody refer to Stam Yid. The Kotzker said, yeah, it's a Stam Yid. You know what a Stam Yid is? Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Umezuzos. Right? That's a Stam Yid. Right? A regular Jew off the street. Right? And even the ones who everyone writes off, right? And even the ones who are off this derech or off that derech, it doesn't make a difference if you're on your own. Everybody has the same Kedusha. A Stam Yid, Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzos. And the power, and therefore we'll say, again, the time, you shouldn't think I'm not just going on tangents. We'll say, therefore, again, the Gemara says that what's death compared to? Death is compared ultimately, again, L'Sefer Torah Shenisraf. Because what happens when a person dies? See, the guf, my body when I'm alive, is endowed. I'm a Stam Yid, Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzos. My body, my guf is endowed with Kedusha Sefer Torah. What's the tragedy of death? The tragedy of death is not the cessation of life. Essentially, we believe in Olam Haba, eternality. The tragedy of death is that now that guf, which was endowed with the Kedusha of Sefer Torah, no longer has that Kedusha. And therefore, again, when a person dies, we do Kriya. like a Sefer Torah Shenisraf. It's incredible. I will say and it's only Sunday. It's only Sunday. Can you imagine what this week is going to be like? It's Sunday. Oh, it's already 8:25. Right, good. Sunday 8:25 in Mamish. Look at this treasure. We struck gold already 15 times. So the Gemara goes right there. The Gemara said, so the Gemara says again, you're right. But the point over here the Gemara is trying to make is there are many other cases where you're going to do kriya that's not for a relative. Right? Many other cases, a Talmud Chacham, an Adam Kasher, Shas Yitzias Neshama. The Mishnah is only talking about a very specific case about doing kriya for relatives. Good. So now, we're going to do some incredible stories. Some just incredible stories that people passed away in the nature of the Levites. Here we go. Kinach Nafshei Rav Safra. When Rav Safra passed away, Lo Karu Rabbanan Alei. The rabbis didn't tear kriya over his loss. Amri, Lo Gamrina Mine. They said, we didn't learn from him. He wasn't our Rebbe. He wasn't our Rebbe. Amr Lu Abaye says, Mi Tanya Harav Shemes. Does the Brisa say if your Rav, Nabal say, there's seen a Rav in the Talmud Chacham, your Rav is one person who teaches you Torah. A Talmud Chacham is what? A Talmud Chacham. Maybe I never learned from him. So Abaye says, does it say Harav Shemes? Chacham Shemes Tanya. Right, Va'od. So first of all, Abaye says to them, who cares that you never learned from him? He's a great Talmud Chacham. And Abba say, again, you have to tear kriya over a Talmud Chacham. We see Abba saying, the power of a Talmud Chacham is that at the end of the day, his Torah betters the world for all of us. So that when he dies, when he passes away, halacha l'maisa, again, the world is more deficient. So therefore, Abaye says the Talmud Chacham dies, everyone has to tear kriya. Whether you learned from him or not, you have to tear kriya. Furthermore, again, va'od, kol yom hashmais yisei b'pomim b'midrasha. Furthermore, again, every single day, Rav Safra's teachings are recorded, right? They're spoken about in the base medrash. So every day Rav Safra is quoted. So in essence, Abaye is saying, you are learning from Rav Safra. So Savra Mad Havas. Okay, so the rabbis accepted Abaye's Musar. They're right. But they figured, okay, now it's already too late. Right? In other words, we didn't tear kriya for Rav Safra. Mad Hava. Both say a very profound mantra for life. Sometimes in life you have to say, Mad Hava, right? Or I guess as they say colloquially, don't cry over spilled milk. Right? What was, but it sounds so much better, and also you sound so much frummer if you say Ma'ida Hava. Right? It sounds much better, right? Ma'ida Hava, right? Well, what was very profound. So they thought, okay, we know for next time. So says the Gemara, Amru Abaye, no, Tanina, Chacham calls man sha'oskin behesben chayav on the Quran. No. As long as you're still giving hespedim. So apparently, again, they were still giving hespedim for Rav Safra. You could still do kriya. Savar the mikra the altar. Man, have a great day. Savar the mikra the altar. So they went ahead and they said, okay, so let's go ahead and tear kriya right now. Amru Abaye, Tanya Chacham kivodo behespedim. No, a Talmud Chacham, you really should wait. The proper cover to a Talmud Chacham is actually to do kriya during the hesped. I will say it's so interesting just to see how morning practices have evolved. So for a Talmud Chacham, the way they used to tear kriya was literally in the middle of the speakers. Right? So now they'd be giving a hesped, and people would become so overwhelmed by emotion as a result of the hesped, they would tear kriya in the midst of the hesped itself. Incredible. Kinach nafshei drafuna. Both say, listen to this beautiful Gemara. Both say, see, by the way, these stories are inspiring, just inspire us to live better. Listen to this. Kinach nafshei Rav Huna. When Rav Huna passed away, Savar la'osuve Sefer Torah Purye, they wanted to put a Sefer Torah on his funeral bier, right, on his bed. We'll say, he says in Eretz Yisrael today, right? Like in Eretz Yisrael, they'll often carry out the mace called like a stretcher. But that's the mean on a funeral bier, on a bier. So they wanted to put, Rav Huna passed away, they wanted to put a Sefer Torah next to his body on the bier. There was, and Rashi points out, V'lomar kiyem zeh mashekasuv bazeh. Ultimately, again, I will say, what was the logic? The logic was to say, this one fulfilled that which was written in this one, which means it was a testament to Rav Huna, that to put a Sefer Torah by his body was to say, he lived his life, his entire body, his entire life was devoted to this, to the Sefer Torah. We'll say, by the way, what's the makar for that practice? The makar for that practice was the fact of Yosef, right? That in the desert, Atzmos Yosef, the bones of Yosef were taken out right alongside or carried alongside the Aron. And the idea was, Asazeh Masha Kasav Bazeh, Gemara Maseches Sota. Right? So we see this, so therefore they wanted to put a Sefer Torah on the funeral bier of Rav Huna. So it says the Gemara, Amalu Rav Chisda, Milsad V'chaye Lo Svir Le Hashta Leikum Le. So the Gemara says, so comes along Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, by the way, you can't do that, because Rav Huna was against this practice. Right, Rav Huna was against this practice, right, of putting a Sefer Torah on the same funeral on the bira with the mace, right? So something he was against during his lifetime. We should do now when he's dead. Rav Tachlifa said, "Ana chazisi Rav Huna to buy the mace because Rav Tachlifa said, "Once I saw Rav Huna, and Rav Huna wanted to sit down on the bed. V'havi manach Sefer Torah alei. There was a Sefer Torah on the bed. And what did Rav Huna do? V'kaf kada'ar ara. V'osif Sefer Torah luya. And Rav Huna took a jug. He overturned the jug. And he put the Torah on the overturned jug. And then he sat down on the bed. So you see, Rav Huna was makbid to never sit down on the same bed as a Sefer Torah. So ultimately, again, Rav Huna would have been against this practice of putting a Sefer Torah on the funeral bier. Alma kasaver asra leishev al gabi mita she Sefer Torah munach aleh. Rav Huna felt one is not permitted to sit on a bed where a Sefer Torah is there. Rav Tachlifa came along and said, we can't do this practice, as beautiful as it is, we can't do it, because Rav Huna would have objected to it. Incredible. So fine. The Gemara goes weiter. Lo hava nafik puriam mi bava. Supposed to listen to this. So they tried to take Rav Huna's funeral bier out of the room where the body was. So what happened? Apparently, again, they could not, the bier could not get through the doorway. Savar l'shalshulei derech gagin. So they figured, okay, maybe we'll just lower the body through the window. Right? In other words, we'll lower it by ropes through the window. Amar Rav Chisda, Hagamirna minei chacham kavodo derech Pesach. So Rav Chisda said, no, you can't do that, because the proper kavod for a Talmud Chacham is what? Is through the doorway. So Savar la'shanuya mipori la'poria. So they said, okay, maybe, apparently the problem was, the funeral bier was too wide. So he said, let's just switch him to another bed. Amru Rav Chisda, Hachi Gamir Naminei Chacham Kivodo B'mita Rishona. The Chacham, you should not move the Talmud Chacham's body from one bier to another. The proper covenant is to keep it on the first bier. How do we know that for a Talmud Chacham, the greatest covenant is to keep him on the first bier, the first bed? Shneimar, Vayarkivu es arna lokim al Agalah Chadasha. They put the Aron. This is talking about again when the Jewish people fought against the Plishtim, they lost, and the Plishtim took the Aron. The Plishtim sent back the Aron back on a brand new wagon. The idea over here is that they didn't switch the Aron from one wagon to another. So too the Talmud Chacham should remain on his first bed. So Rabbi says, how do they get the body out? So isn't this credible? What do they do? Parus Bava Vavkua. What do? They broke through the doorway. People say, what an incredible Moser. You see, sometimes in life, when you can't get through the door, so there are different eitzes. Sometimes you have to find another doorway, right? Sometimes you have to find another doorway. Or sometimes you have to go ahead and retool certain things. And sometimes you just have to break through. Sometimes when the doorway is just too small, the eitzah is breakthrough. That's it. So the Gemara goes weiter. Pasach Ali Rabbi Abba. Roy Hayar Rabbeinu Shetishra Alav Shchina Elo Shabavel Gam Rabos. Listen to this. So now, fine, they're delivering the Hespedim for Rav Huna. So the first Hesper Rabbi Abba says, Rav Huna really was fit for prophecy. He was fit for prophecy. What held him back from prophecy? Elo Shabavel Garmala. And we'll say, why didn't he become a Navi? Because he lived in Chutz La'aretz. What he could have accomplished had he lived in Eretz Yisrael. We'll say, what a painful thing to say. Right? Because isn't this something that we live with every single day? As much as we accomplish, imagine what we really could accomplish if we were in Eretz Yisrael. Imagine what would really happen if at the end of the day we lived in an atmosphere of Kedusha. Imagine if we had the ability not only to engage in dynamic activity, but to soak up the Kedusha of the land as well, what we could accomplish. Rav Huna could have been a Navi. But he lived in Bavel. Master Rav Nachman said, Master Rav Nachman Bar Chisda, V'amalei Rav Chanan Bar Chisda. So remember, the problem over is Rabbi Amma made it sound like Rav Huna could have been he said Rav Huna could have been a Navi, but he lived in Galus, he lived in Chutz La'aretz, which sounds like you can't be a Navi in Chutz La'aretz. Is that true? Haya Dvar Hashem al Yecheskel ben Buzia Kohen Beretz Kasdim. But the pasuk says that the word of God came to Yechezkel ben Buzi when he was in the land of Kasdim. Hayo. Right? The word, so we'll say, sounds like Yechezkel's prophesying even outside of Eretz Yisrael. So let's listen to this. So Tafach le'avlo b'sandale. So we'll say, remember again, this was Rav Nachman bar Chisda, Rav Chanan bar Chisda. They said this. So their father Chisda, Tafach le'avlo b'sandale makes it sound like father hit him with a shoe. Doesn't hit him with a shoe. Rashi points out over here what it means over here. Really, actually, the Maharsha points out. Excuse me. What it means is Rashi. Tafach la'avue. Rav Chisda b'sandal shetafach lo Rav Nachman al sandalo. It means he kicked him in the shoe. Or I was supposed to say, like he gave him like a little tap against the foot, telling him that it was an incorrect interpretation. Amar lei, lava mina lacha. Haven't I told you so many times? Lo tichrod alma. Do not bother everyone with foolish answers. My hayo shahaya kvar. Here's the difference. Yechezkel did prophesize outside of Eretz Yisrael. But do you know why? Because he first prophesied in Eretz Yisrael. In other words, they will say, if a Navi had Nevuah in Eretz Yisrael, then ultimately, again, he could continue to prophesy outside of Eretz Yisrael. The problem is, if he didn't start with prophecy in Eretz Yisrael, there's no prophecy in Chutz. We'll say another raya to this. Who else had prophecy outside of Eretz Yisrael? Yonah. And it was the same thing. His prophecy started in Eretz Yisrael. Once you start in Eretz Yisrael, you can continue outside. Good. So we'll say now, continue with the Levaya of Rav Huna. They brought Rav Huna to burial in Eretz Yisrael. Then we'll say, if you look at Rashi says, Ki askol lahasam the Eretz Yisrael kovro. So we'll say, you see something amazing. So the concept of, why take the body from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael? So look what Rashi says, Shekala nikbar sham, nikbar below ched. Shne'emar, ha'am ha'yoshev ba nasu avon. Kedisa b'ksubas. Then we'll say, get ready for this. When you're buried in Eretz Yisrael, burial in Eretz Yisrael, by definition, allows all of your sins to be forgiven. V'chiper admaso amo. Ultimately, again, the soil itself of Eretz Yisrael atones for all one's sins. That's why you have to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara says over here, so they were taking Rav Huna, therefore, to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. So this is a great story. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Asi, Rav Huna asu. So they say to Rabbi Asi, Rav Huna's here. So listen to the reaction. Amru, they said, oh gosh, ki avinan hasam lo havam. When we lived in Bavel, we could never lift our heads in the presence of Rav Huna because he was the Gadol Adar. We purposely moved here to Eretz Yisrael to be able to stake out, our own base medrash. And now Rav Huna's coming as well. So the Gemara says, Amru lo, no, he's dead. Amru le aronoba. So I'll say, they thought, it's interesting, they thought that when the announcement came Rav Huna's here, they thought Rav Huna was alive, right? And now he was moving, he made Aliyah, he was moving to Eretz Yisrael. And the truth is, they were like a little bit, it was difficult for them because they felt that in the shadow of Rav Huna, they could not fully self-actualize, so they came to Eretz Yisrael. Now that Rav Huna's coming to Eretz Yisrael, and then they were told, no, he's dead. It's his urn, it's his casket that's here. So what happened? Rabbi Asi Nafok. So they came out. Rabbi Ila, Rabbi Chanina lo Nafok. First wide line was of the widest lines. Rabbi Ila and Rabbi Chanina did not come out. Ikad Amri, Rabbi Ila Nafik, Rabbi Chanina lo Nafik. So the Nafik might time. I suppose say the point over here is that some Rabbanim came out, some did not. Why? Why the difference? So the Gemara says, listen to this. Truly beautiful. The Gemara says, so my time, the nafik my time, the sanya arona over makom lamakom omdim alav b'shur va'omrim alav birkas avelim v'tanchumi avelim. Because the Rebbe said the halacha is that when the casket of a Talmud Chacham comes to a particular place, when it comes to your city, you have to come out. They form a line and they say birchas avelim and words of consolation. That's the reason why the Talmud Chacham came out. The lo nafik my time. What about the ones who did not come out? Why didn't they come out? The sanya arna over makom lamakom ein omdin alav b'shura ve'ein omrim alav birchas avelim v'tanchumi avelim. I kashina adadi. So I will say this seems to be a contradiction. So again, we have two brises. One brisa says that when the casket of Talmud Chacham comes, everyone should come out. They should form a line, say birchas avelim and words of consolation. Yet the second brisa says you don't have to do it. So how do you reconcile this? Very simple. Lokashya, kanshe shalado kayemes, kanshe in shalado kayemes. So we'll say, what does it depend on? Is the skeleton intact? In other words, if the skeleton's intact, then everybody's obligated to come out to come out and give kavod. If the skeleton is not intact, in other words, the remains are not intact, then Allah L'maisa, they're not obligated to come out. So both say, now obviously, Rav Huna shlado kayemes hava. So both say Rav Huna's skeleton was intact, of course, because remember again, he just passed away not so long ago, right? They took him from Babel Tartzah for burial now. So why the chaver that didn't come out? Why didn't they come out? They both say, listen to this Moser Delo Nafik. Lo Semua Kamer. Both say no. So therefore, the Rabbanim didn't come out. Do you know what happened? They didn't stay till the end of Shir. They didn't stay till the end of Shir. And what happens when you don't stay till the end of Shir? What happens? Good Moser. What happens? You miss critical information. So I'll say, so what happens? So they heard in the Shir, the Brisa that said that you don't have to come out when the Aron passes through the city, but they didn't hear the end of the Shir that said it's only if the skeleton is not intact, but if the skeleton is intact, you have to come out and give kavod. So again, they missed the end of the Shir, therefore they made a mistake in halacha. Amri Heichan Inchei Rav Huna. Let's listen to this. Now, Rav Huna's body is in Eretz Yisrael. Now what's the Shaila? Where should we bury him? Where in Eretz Yisrael should we bury him? So the Gemara says, listen to this. So the Gemara says, Rav Huna rebates Torah b'Yisrael, Rav Chia rebates Torah b'Yisrael. So they said, you know what? Let's bury him in the burial cave of Rabbi Chia. Because Rav Huna was a Marbitz Torah, right? And Rabbi Chia was a Marbitz Torah, right? Both of them taught Torah to the masses. So let's bury Rav Huna by Rabbi Chia. Okay, so I'll say what happens. So the Gemara says, Man Mayole, who is going to take Rav Huna's casket into the cave, into the burial cave of Rav Chia? Some Rav Chaga, Ana Ma'ilana. I'll take it in. The Gemara says, Du ukmase letamudai ki havina bar tamni sarishnin. Because he said, now Rav Chaga says, I think I'm able to do it. Why? Because again, I became proficient in my learning by the time I was 18 years old. V'lo chazi li kari. And I never had an unnecessary seminal emission, umashma le kameh, and ultimately again I used to serve Rabbi Chia during his lifetime. So we'll say it's actually a very profound combination of information over here. Ready says three things. Number one, my learning was organized. My learning was organized by the time I was 18. I never had a seminal emission, unnecessary seminal emission, and I was Mishamish Rabbi Chia, and I served Rabbi Chia, which also tells you that the three criteria for spiritual success in life, ultimately again, is trying to whatever degree possible to rein in on thoughts of impure thoughts. It's difficult, because again, our mind wanders, and very often especially, we see things, we look at things, and it's hard. It's hard to undo. It's an amazing thing. It's hard to undo what you see, and it's hard to undo what you experience. But somehow we have to, even though I can't erase it, I have to figure out a way to kind of struggle to keep it in check. That's the carry piece. The idea is to have my learning organized. So to have my learning organized means make a commitment to learning and stick with it. And ultimately, Mishamish Tamidi Chacham, and going back to our role models thing, find someone who has the ideas, the ideals, the morals that you want. Stick with that person. Spend time with that person. Cultivate a relationship with that person. This is the secret to success. V'yadi bu'uvdei. Diyom achad. Listen to this. And furthermore again. So Rav Chaga. Rav Chaga said, and furthermore again, I know all about the behaviors of Rabbi Chia. But listen to Rabbi Chia. The Yom Achad is hafoiche le ritzua de tefillin. One day, let's listen to this. Rabbi Chia's tefillin, the ritzua, flipped over, so that the white part was exposed. And what happened? V'yasev alei arba'in tanisa. And Rabbi Chia fasted for 40 days. In other words, he was so meticulous with his own spiritual activity that the tefillin, the ritzua, moved the wrong way, and halacha l'maaseh he fasted. So let's listen to this story. So Rabbi Chaga took in the casket of Rav Huna. Havegani Yehuda miyamine da'avua v'chizkiya mismale. So what's this? Rabbi Chia is buried by his two sons. His son Yehuda was on his right hand, and his son Chizkiya was on his left side. Amar le Yehuda lechizkiya. So this is wild. So now Rav Chaga walks into the burial cave. He has the casket of Rav Huna. So now the two sons of Rabbi Chia have a conversation. Yehuda says to Chizkiya, Kumi duchtach delav orach ara dekayim Rav Huna bahadei. So Yehuda says to Chizkiya, get up. get up, right? Get up from your grave and make room for Rav Huna. Make room for Rav Huna. So the Gemara says, so Rav Huna, so the Gemara says, so what happened? The Kaim kam bahadei amuda dinura. So listen to this. When Chizkiah got up from his grave, a great pillar of fire descended, and what happened? So the Gemara says, Chazi Rav Chaga, Ivis Zogfei la'arona v'nafa. So what happened? Rav Chaga saw the pillar of fire. He hid behind the casket of Rav Huna to save himself from the fire, and ultimately, again, he ran out. And ultimately, again, he was only saved because he hid behind the casket of Rav Huna. There will say a lot to say on that story, incredible symbolisms and incredible messages. We'll have to save it for the next cycle. I will say, interestingly enough, by the way, what you do see from here, I will say something very interesting. We've actually seen this before. One of the ways they used to bury was standing up. In other words, I will say what they would do is they would lower people into the grave in a standing position, not in a lying position, which also, if you think about it, by the way, also allows for what? More graves. More graves. It's really quite fascinating. I will say, you should know, by the way, now in Eretz Yisrael, one of the interesting things that they're doing is they're stacking graves. So often when husbands and wives buy graves together, what they're really buying is one grave. One grave. Whoever dies first goes into a deeper grave, and then again they seal off the first grave, and then the second person ultimately is buried in an upper grave. So it seems to be Bismana Gemara, what they often used to do is bury standing up, ultimately also concerned. Good. So the Gemara goes right. We'll say so much to say. I'm sorry, we have to move weiter. So Kinach Nafshed Rav Chisda. And Rav Chisda passed away. Savar la'asuve Sefer Torah Puri. They wanted once again to put a Sefer Torah in his funeral beer. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Milsei dil Rabbi lo svir le, ananekum navid le. So how can you do this? Because Rav Chisda's Rebbe didn't allow this. And now you're going to do it for him. Savar dilo mishlo karaihu. So we'll say, so what happened? So they went ahead as far as they didn't put the Sefer Torah there. So they tore Kriya, and they thought that you're not even allowed to loosely stitch up the tear. Amru Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ami, Chacham, last line, Chevan shechziru panei me'acharei amita, sholin. We'll say the halacha is, everyone is obligated to tear Kriya for a Talmud Chacham. But once you turn away from the funeral beer, you're allowed to stitch up the tear, albeit in a loose fashion. Kinach nafshed Rav Bar Huna for Rav Hamnuna. Both listen to this. When Rabba Bar Rav Huna and Rav Hamnuna both passed away, as kinu lahasam, they took the bodies to Eretz Yisrael for burial. Amid Beis. Ki matu agish Rabba. Listen to this wild story. So they're taking the bodies to Eretz Yisrael for burial. So they got to a bridge, and Rabbi said it was a narrow bridge. Kala olam kulo geshet sarma. Oh, there was a narrow bridge. So what happened? Only one person could go in front. So Rabbi, listen to this. Kamel gamle. The camels stopped moving. Apparently, again, they placed the caskets on camels, and the camels stopped moving. Amalu Taya, my high. So the Arab leader, the Arab guy who was leading the camel said, "What's going on over here?" So listen to this. Amrulei Rabbanan de Ka'avdi Yakira Ahadadi. Mar Mar Neil Boresha. Umar Mar Neil Boresha. So the Jews there told the Arab, the Rabbanim, they're being deferential to each other. This one is saying, you go first. And this one is saying, no, you go first. So the camels won't move because each of the Rabbanim are trying to be deferential to the other. So listen to this. So the Arab weighs in. Amar, Dinahu Dira Barafuna Leobresh. You know what? I think Rab Barafuna should go first too. So the Arab decided to weigh in on this. Right? He said Rab Barafuna should go first. So Chalaf coming to Rab Barafuna. So ultimately, again, the camel of Rab Barafuna went first. Natar Kachye B'Shinei Dautaya. And then all of the Arabs' teeth fell out. Right? We'll say, good Muslim, by the way, don't get involved in stuff that's not your business. Right? So I'll say, so ultimately, again, so the Arab goes ahead and gets involved, all of his teeth falls out. Good. So we'll say, so now listen to this. So remember, so just so you understand, this is Rabbi Rav Huna and Rav Hamnuna, who apparently passed away at the same time. They died in Babel. Their bodies are now brought to Eretz Yisrael for burial. Here are the Hespedim. Pasach Aleahu Yenuka. So a young child began to eulogize Rav Hamnuna, and he said, Gezer Yeshishim Allah mi Babel, a student of the sages came up from Babel, V'imo Sefer Melchamos Ka'as V'kapol Huchpalu Liros V'shod V'shever Haba Mishinar Katzaf Olamo V'chamas Mimeno Nefashos V'samach Bahem Kekala Chadasha Rochev Aravo Sas V'samach B'voyelav Nefesh Naki V'tzadik. So again, the young child delivered this beautiful, beautiful eulogy where he calls again Rav Hamnuna the student of the sages. Is interesting, I will say, how the first praise that was given to Rav Huna was not his own accomplishments, but rather what? That he was a student of the Talmidei Chachamim. Because I will say, sometimes the greatest accomplishment you could have in life is the willingness to be a student, the willingness to be a Talmud. Because if I'm willing to be a Talmud, then I'm willing to learn. A willingness to learn represents a willingness to grow. The moment that I think I know everything and I don't need to learn anything anymore, I don't need a Rebbe, I don't need someone, is the moment, amazingly enough, that my growth stops. So the Gemara goes weiter. When Ravina passed away, somebody else eulogized him as well. And he said, Tamarim heniu rosh al tzadi katamar. Literally, again, the palm trees. Bend your heads for the tzaddik who was like a date palm. So nosim leilos kiyamim. We must make our nights like days. In other words, we should mourn night, day and night. Al mesim leilos kiyamim. For the person who made his nights like his days. Rabbi said this is so beautiful. So when they eulogized Ravina, they said we should go ahead and mourn our nights like our nasim leilos kiyamim. We should make our nights like our days for the person who made his nights like his days. What does that mean? Ravina learned Torah by night just like he learned by day. He made his nights into his days. So too we should mourn by night and by day as well to remember him. It's so beautiful. Rav Ashi the Bar Kipok. Rav Ashi said to Bar Kipok, Hahu Yoma, my Amrit, supposed to listen to this. Rav Ashi said to Bar Kipok, when I die, what hesped are you going to give for me? Right? It's interesting. Rav Ashi is curious. How are you going to eulogize me when I die? So the Gemara says, Asa Amrit Le, my Amrit, Amrit Le Amina, I would say the following. In Ba'arazim, first white line. In Ba'arazim Nafla Shal Haves. Ma Yazue Zuvekir. So again, Bar Kipok said, here's the eulogy of Rav Ashi. Here it goes. If the fire could take down the cedar trees, what will happen to the hyssop plants, right, which are smaller plants? So Bechika Hoala Mayas Bechuka Hoala Mayasa Dage Rakak. I'm sorry, Levyasan Bechika Hoala. If the Levyasan could be brought up with a fish hook, then ultimately what will the small fish do? In other words, what Bar Kipok was saying to Rav Ashi, the eulogy I'm going to give you is, if even the greatest of the great die, then what's in store for the rest of us, right? If the fire of death could take down the cedar, then all the more so the hyssop plants. If the fish hook could nab the Levyasan, right, Leviathan, all the more so what it does for the small fish. He goes on, Benachal Shotef Naflachika, in the raging stream, ultimately dryness took over. Mayasa Megavim, what's going to happen to the little ponds? So I will say, so again, Bar Kipok was trying to show Rav Ashi that when you die, I'm going to show people, if death even occurs to Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi has to give din v'cheshbon, has to give an accounting for his life, then Allah has kama v'kama, how much we each have to prepare ourselves. Amalei Bar Avin chas v'shalom, dechika v'shal heves b'tzadik amina. So Bar Avin said, why would you use the lashon ultimately again of a fish hook and death? Fish hook and death, fish hook and fire. Fish hook and fire have such a negative connotation. So what would you say? Amina, let's listen to this. Here's the proper hesped. Bachu la'avelim v'lo la'aveda. Cry for the mourners, but not for the one who has been lost. Shehila menucha, for the soul has gone on to eternal rest. Va'anu la'anacha, but it is us who is left in agony. I will say, what a beautiful, beautiful hesped. Cry for the avelim, do not cry for the person who has died. For the person who has died has found rest, and we are the ones who find ourselves in agony. So beautiful. Chalash daite. So I will say, Rav Ashi was very distressed. Rav Ashi was distressed ultimately again because he felt that at the end of the day, if you look at Rashi, Chalash daite, dahai medameh l'shalhaves, v'hai la'aveda. Rav Ashi felt that people were going to compare his loss either to a fire or to a lost object. Because he became distressed, so ishapoch karaihu, the people who gave these eulogies for Rav Ashi, they told him what they were going to say, their feet were turned around. They became crippled. They will say, now again, it could be literal, their feet became turned around, or it just means they suffered some type of setback. So the Gemara says, Hahu Yoma lo asulas peduye. And when Rav Ashi passed away, these individuals did not actually eulogize him. Rav Ashi lo bar kipok chalitz v'lo bar avin chalitz. That's why people used to say, bar kipok, bar avin, they can't do chalitza. I both say for the process of chalitza, what do you have to do? You have to remove a shoe off the foot. So something happened to their feet that they were unable to do chalitza. Okay, so the Gemara says, Rava kiava asla diglas. So Rava, when he came to diglas, Amar le lebar avin kum ema milsa. He said to Bar Avin, stand up and say something. So the Gemara says, Kai va'amar bo'u rov shlishis b'mayim. So listen to this. So let me give you the background to this. So if you take a look here, it says Rava came to the river Diglos. He came to the river Diglos. And he says to Bar Avin, kum ema milsa. So listen to this. If you look at Rashi says over here, Asu le Diglos chidekel. He came to the river Chidekel, and ultimately again, Rava has to pass through the river. So he's nervous to pass through the river. So he says to Bar Avin, say something, give me chizik. Vamar. He says, so Bar Avin said the following, Bo rov shlishis b'mayim. The third has come into the water. Now he referred to Rava as being as pious and as virtuous and as holy as 1/3 of Klal Yisrael. Zachar v'rachim ta'inu rachamecha ki isha mibayla. Al taznichenu kaos me mara. So he says. So the tefillah he says is the person who is as virtuous as 1/3 of Klal Yisrael has come to the water, split the waters, or allowed to pass through the water. Remember him. Go ahead and have compassion on him. And even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have veered from you, sometimes like a woman who veers from her husband, do not go ahead and forsake us. You remember the oath, remember ultimately the son of the Mei Mara, which refers to the Mei Sota. In other words, even though sometimes we go ahead and we veer from you, remember that we are faithful to you. Rav Chanin, Chasei de Benesia, lo havu le bani. But let's listen to this. Rav Chanin, the son-in-law of the Nasi, did not have children. Boy Rachame, he davened v'havile, and he was given children. Hahu Yoma, Dahavile Nach Nafshe. But the very day Rav Chanin had a child, he died. See, he died the very day that his child came into this world. Pasach Aleahu Saptana. So when he was eulogized, the eulogizer said, Simcha Letuga Nebcha. Ultimately, again, the Simcha, the joy, turned into sadness. Sason V'yagon Nidbeku Beis Simcha. So ultimately, again, Sason V'yagon, joy and mourning, came together at a time, right? Be'is simchaso ne'anach, be'is chaninaso avad chanino. Ultimately, again, at the time of simcha, we became downtrodden. At the time of favor, chaninaso avad chanino. His chen was lost. Asikule Chanan al Shmei, and they named the baby Chanan. They named him Chanan. Ultimately, again, Abosai seems to be, by the way, like a little bit. His father was Chanin, not Chanan, but they named him after his father. But also again, Be'is Chaninaso, that his life should be one of favor. Abosai, we'll just do one more line. Kinach Nashet Rabbi Yochanan Pasach Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar. When Rabbi Yochanan passed away, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar eulogized him, and he said, Kashayom li Yisrael, ki yom ba shemesh b'tzarayim. This day, the loss of Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar, the loss of Rabbi Yochanan is as difficult as the day where the sun set midday. When did the sun set midday? Dichsiv, v'haya b'yom ahu, ve'evesi shemesh b'tzarayim. On that day, I will cause the sun to set at midday. V'am Rabbi Yochanan, ze yomo shel Yoshiyahu. That is the day that King Yoshio was killed by Paro. Both remember again, we actually make reference to this event in Kinos, Va'ikonin Yirmiyo al Yoshio. That when Yoshio died, it was the end, essentially, of Jewish autonomy, of Jewish monarchy. So the day that Yoshio died, and Yoshio was a big tzaddik, but ultimately, again, he didn't allow Paro to march through his land. He's killed by Paro, and that day was a dark day for Klal Yisrael. Literally, again, the sun set midday. We'll stop over here for today. Allah Baruch Hashem in one day. Emir Hashem will continue. We'll say incredible Gemara for the rest of the Masechta. Shkayach everyone. Have a wonderful day. All right, everyone, Zoom. Have a great day.